Welcome to Northern Mystery Archives. Here we don't soften the truth and we don't skip the details. We investigate the forgotten files from the far north of Canada, the disappearances that were quietly shelved, the settlements that faded from every map, the transmissions that were never meant to be heard again. In this channel, nothing is hidden. Every fragment, every silence, every erased trail is examined with the seriousness these cases deserved but never received. If you value cold, atmospheric, minimalist investigations into the unexplained wilderness of the North, you're in the right place. Subscribe, stay close, and step with us into the files they hoped no one would ever revisit. Below, we will be speaking about the case titled Elara Winslow, March 12, 1988, Unexplained Frozen Track Disappearance. It all began when a forestry contractor discovered something impossible in the snow. The file sits in a metal cabinet in the basement of a small regional detachment, untouched for decades. The label reads simply, Winslow, case number 488-0312, March 1988. Status, unresolved. Inside are photographs, witness statements and maps marked with fading pencil lines that lead nowhere. The pages smell of mildew and institutional neglect. This is not a case anyone wanted to solve. This is a case that made experienced investigators question what they knew about the northern wilderness. Elara Winslow was 26 years old when she vanished. A wildlife surveyor contracted through the Provincial Resource Ministry, she spent most of her time alone in remote territories, documenting animal populations and logging environmental data. Those who worked with her described someone meticulous, self-sufficient, and comfortable in isolation. She carried her own gear, never missed a scheduled radio check, and kept detailed field notebooks that read like poetry as much as science. She lived in a rented room above a hardware store in a town so small it barely warranted a name. The locals knew her as the woman who bought supplies in bulk and asked questions about weather patterns. She drove a dented green pickup truck with provincial plates and kept to herself. No one knew much about her past. She never mentioned family, never spoke of where she came from before arriving in the territory 2 years earlier. On March 10, 1988, Elara left for what was supposed to be a 4-day survey deep in the boreal corridor north of the settlement. Her destination was a region known locally as the Burnt Reach, a sprawling expanse of black spruce and frozen muskeg where fires had scorched the land decades prior. The trees grew back twisted and low, the ground remained uneven, and the cold settled deeper than anywhere else in the region. It was not a place people visited without reason. She filed her route plan with the forestry office, a standard procedure that included GPS coordinates, expected checkpoints, and emergency contact protocols. Her supervisor signed off on the paperwork without concern. Elara had completed dozens of similar assignments. There was no reason to expect this one would be different. The weather forecast predicted clear skies and temperatures hovering near -15 degrees Celsius. Conditions were cold but manageable for someone with her experience. The last confirmed sighting of Elara Winslow occurred at a fuel station on the outer edge of the settlement. The attendant remembered her filling the truck, purchasing a thermos of coffee, and checking a folded map against the dashboard. He paid in cash, asked about road conditions heading north, and left without further conversation. The time was logged as 7:43 in the morning. The sun had not yet fully risen. Her first radio check was scheduled for noon on March 11th. She did not make contact. The second check, scheduled for 6 that evening, also went unanswered. By midnight, the forestry office had initiated search protocols. A contractor working in an adjacent zone was dispatched to investigate. He reached the coordinates Elara had filed and found her truck parked on a logging access road, driver's side door closed, engine cold. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside the vehicle, Everything appeared organized. Her field pack sat on the passenger seat, fully stocked with emergency supplies. Her sleeping bag was rolled and secured in the truck bed. A half-empty thermos of coffee rested in the cup holder, still liquid but frozen at the surface. There were no signs of struggle, no indications of mechanical failure, no evidence that anything had gone wrong, except for one detail that would define every investigation to follow. A single set of snowshoe tracks led away from the truck, heading north into the forest. The prints were clean, evenly spaced, and deliberate. They suggested someone walking with purpose, not fleeing or wandering. The Burnt Reach occupies a section of wilderness that appears on official maps, but remains largely unexplored by anyone outside of forestry operations. It sits roughly 80 kilometers north of the nearest permanent settlement, accessible only by seasonal logging roads that become impassable during spring thaw. The region earned its name from a wildfire that consumed nearly 40 square kilometers in the late 1950s. What grew back was dense, stunted, and disorienting. Travelers reported compasses behaving erratically, though geologists attributed this to localized mineral deposits in the bedrock. The terrain consists of undulating muskeg, broken by shallow ridges of exposed granite. In winter, the snow cover is deceptive. What appears to be solid ground often conceals pockets of frozen marsh that can shift underfoot. The spruce trees grow in tight clusters, their branches interlocking overhead to create tunnels of shadow even at midday. Visibility drops to less than 20 meters in some areas. Sound behaves strangely here. Voices carry farther than they should, while other noises seem muffled, absorbed by the dense growth and the cold itself. Wildlife in the Burnt Reach follows predictable patterns. Moose frequent the lowlands during winter, seeking shelter among the thicker stands of trees. Lynx and foxes leave tracks along ridgelines where the snow is shallower. Wolves pass through but do not den in the area. The absence of wolf activity puzzled biologists for years, until surveys revealed an unusually low population of prey species. Something about the region discouraged animals from lingering, though no one could identify a clear cause. Human presence in the Burnt Reach has always been minimal. The original indigenous inhabitants avoided the area, according to records kept by early explorers. Later settlers built nothing permanent within its boundaries. Logging operations entered the region in the 1970s, but crews reported high turnover rates. Workers complained of persistent unease, difficulty sleeping in camp, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Several contractors abandoned equipment rather than return to retrieve it. The operations ceased entirely by the early 1980s, deemed financially unviable despite accessible timber. Elara, Winslow's assignment involved surveying wolverine populations, a species known for its elusiveness and preference for remote territories. The work required her to establish observation points, set up motion-triggered cameras, and document any tracks or scat she encountered. It was solitary, methodical work that could take days without any significant findings. She would have been moving slowly, pausing frequently to record data, covering perhaps 10 to 15 kilometers per day, depending on terrain. The logging road where her truck was found terminated at a turnaround point used by forestry vehicles. Beyond that, no maintained paths existed. The area she intended to survey lay further north, accessible only on foot or snowshoe. The tracks leading away from her vehicle suggested she had begun her work as planned. The clearing where those tracks ended sat roughly at the midpoint of her intended route, near a shallow depression that might have served as a natural observation site. Weather records from March 11th and 12th show no unusual activity. Temperatures remained stable between -12 and -18 degrees Celsius. Wind speeds were light, averaging less than 15 kilometers per hour. No precipitation occurred. Visibility was excellent. These were ideal conditions for outdoor work, conditions Elara would have welcomed. There was nothing in the meteorological data to suggest environmental factors played a role in her disappearance. The contractor who discovered her truck noted one additional detail that did not appear in official reports until much later. The area surrounding the clearing where the tracks ended was unnaturally silent. He described it as the absence of ambient noise, the kind of silence that suggests emptiness rather than stillness. No wind in the trees, no distant bird calls, no cracking of branches under the weight of snow. He stated he felt compelled to leave the area quickly, though he could not articulate why. His report was filed and largely ignored by investigators who attributed his unease to the shock of discovering an abandoned scene. Maps of the burnt reach reveal little of value to searchers. Elevation changes are gradual, with no cliffs or steep drops that might indicate an accident. The nearest body of water is a frozen creek nearly 8 kilometers west of the clearing, too far to reach by accident and in the wrong direction from Elara's tracks. Caves and natural shelters are absent from geological surveys. The region is, for all purposes, featureless boreal forest, the kind of landscape that swallows details and offers nothing in return. The settlement Elara departed from consisted of fewer than 200 permanent residents. It functioned primarily as a staging area for forestry and resource extraction operations. The hardware store, fuel station, and a small diner constituted the entire commercial district. There was no hospital, no police station, only a ranger office that coordinated with regional authorities when needed. Most residents worked seasonal contracts and left during winter. Those who stayed year-round knew each other by name and reputation. Elara's landlord described her as an ideal tenant. She paid rent on time, kept the room tidy, and made no noise. She had moved in during the spring of 1986 with little more than a duffel bag and a few boxes of books. She worked steadily through the seasons, accepting contracts the forestry office struggled to fill. The search for Elara Winslow began in earnest on the morning of March 12th. A 4-person team assembled at the ranger office before dawn, equipped with radios, cold weather gear, and topographic maps marked with her last known position. The team included 2 forestry rangers, a volunteer tracker with 30 years of experience in the northern wilderness, and the contractor who had discovered the abandoned truck. They traveled by snowmobile, reaching the site within 2 hours. The initial plan focused on expanding the search radius from the clearing where the tracks ended. Standard protocol assumed she had continued on foot in a direction the snow failed to record, perhaps walking on exposed rock or windswept ground. The team fanned out in a grid pattern, moving north and east based on her filed route. They searched for 8 hours, covering an area of approximately 15 square kilometers. They found nothing. No additional tracks, no discarded equipment. No signs of human passage. On the second day, the search area doubled. A helicopter was brought in to conduct aerial surveys, flying low over the canopy to spot any breaks in the tree cover or signs of disturbance. The pilot reported nothing unusual. The forest below appeared uniform, unbroken except for natural features. Ground teams continued sweeping the terrain, now moving west and south to account for the possibility that Elara had become disoriented. The tracker noted that the snow conditions were ideal for preserving prints. Any movement should have left evidence. By March 14th, the search had expanded to include volunteers from the settlement and neighboring areas. Nearly 30 people combed the burnt reach, calling out her name, marking trees to avoid redundant coverage, and documenting every meter of ground. They worked in shifts, rotating through warm-up stations set up along the logging road. The effort was exhaustive. Every hollow, every thicket, every slight depression in the snow was examined. The results remained unchanged. Elara Winslow had left one set of tracks, and those tracks ended inexplicably in the middle of a clearing. The investigation turned to the truck itself. Forensic technicians traveled from the regional center to process the vehicle. They dusted for fingerprints, collected samples of the coffee in the thermos, and catalogued every item inside. The analysis revealed nothing suspicious. Elara's fingerprints were present throughout the cab. As expected, no other prints were found. The coffee contained no traces of drugs or contaminants. Her field notes, recovered from the pack, were written in her usual precise handwriting and detailed observations from the previous day's travel. The final entry was logged at 5:17 in the evening on March 10th, describing the location of a possible Wolverine den. Investigators interviewed everyone who had interacted with Elara in the days leading up to her disappearance. The fuel station attendant repeated his account. The forestry office confirmed her contract details. Her landlord provided access to her rented room, which yielded little of investigative value. She owned minimal personal possessions, a few changes of clothing, a small collection of field guides, and a single photograph tucked into a notebook. The photograph showed a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, standing beside a lake. No one could identify the child or the location. Elara had never mentioned having a daughter or any family. The search entered its 3rd week with no progress. Resources were strained, and volunteers began to withdraw. The forestry office suspended further helicopter flights due to budget constraints. Ground teams continued in reduced numbers, focusing on areas flagged as statistically probable based on search and rescue models. The models predicted she would be found within a 5-kilometer radius of the clearing, assuming she had walked in any direction after the tracks ended. She was not. On March 27th, the official search was suspended. The file remained open, classified as an ongoing missing person case, but active efforts ceased. The lead investigator, a provincial constable named Merrick, who had traveled from the regional capital, gave a brief statement to local media. He described the case as unprecedented in his experience. He emphasized that the investigation was not closed, that any new information would be pursued, but that the available evidence had been thoroughly exhausted. He did not speculate about what might have happened. He did not offer theories. He simply stated facts, and the facts were insufficient. Elara's truck was towed to a storage yard where it remained for 18 months before being auctioned to cover unpaid fees. Her belongings were boxed and held by the forestry office, unclaimed. No family came forward, no next of kin was identified despite efforts to trace her background. She appeared in government records only after her arrival in the territory 2 years prior. Before that, nothing. No employment history, no tax records, no previous addresses. It was as though she had materialized fully formed in 1986, with no past to anchor her existence. The clearing where the tracks ended was revisited multiple times over the following months. Investigators documented the scene extensively, taking measurements, soil samples, and photographs from every angle. The snow eventually melted, revealing bare ground and low vegetation. No additional clues emerged. The site looked like any other patch of forest, unremarkable and indifferent. During the summer, a forestry crew erected a small cairn of stones at the location, an unofficial memorial. It bore no plaque, no inscription, just a pile of rocks marking the place where a woman's footprints stopped and offered no explanation. In the years since, the burnt reach has returned to its usual state of neglect. The logging roads have deteriorated, reclaimed by undergrowth and erosion. The clearing remains accessible to those who know where to look, though few have reason to visit. Occasionally, hikers or forestry workers pass through and report the same unsettling sensation noted by the contractor who found Elara's truck. The investigation into Elara Winslow's disappearance encountered obstacles from the outset, many of which stemmed from the remote location and the limited resources available to northern detachments. Constable Merrick, who assumed lead responsibilities, later described the case as operationally challenging due to the absence of witnesses, the lack of physical evidence beyond the truck and tracks, and the logistical difficulties of conducting a prolonged search in hostile terrain. His reports, archived and recently made accessible, reveal a methodical approach constrained by circumstance. Initial interviews focused on establishing Elara's state of mind and any potential conflicts that might suggest voluntary disappearance. Colleagues at the forestry office uniformly described her as professional and reliable. None reported interpersonal difficulties. Her landlord confirmed she had paid rent through the end of April, indicating no intention to leave permanently. The fuel station attendant recalled no signs of distress. Every account painted a picture of someone proceeding with routine work, exhibiting no behavior consistent with planning to vanish. Background checks proved frustratingly incomplete. Elara had applied for her position with the forestry office in early 1986, submitting a resume that listed previous work in environmental consulting and field research. The companies named on her resume were contacted. 2 had gone out of business. The third had no record of employing anyone by her name. Educational credentials listed a degree in ecology from an institution that confirmed no graduate matching her details. The discrepancies raised questions but led nowhere. Either she had fabricated her qualifications or she had used an assumed identity when applying for the position. Financial records offered limited insight. Elara maintained a single bank account in the settlement into which her paychecks were deposited and from which she made modest withdrawals for living expenses. No large transactions, no transfers to other accounts, no credit cards. She lived within her means and saved little. The account balance at the time of her disappearance was just under $2,000. It remained untouched. No activity occurred after March 10th. Forensic analysis of the tracks provided the most detailed technical examination. A specialist in winter tracking was brought in to assess the scene after the initial search. His report, spanning 14 pages, dissected every aspect of the prints. The stride length was consistent with someone of Elara's height walking at a normal pace. The depth of the impressions indicated a load of approximately 60 to 70 pounds, matching her body weight plus a moderate pack. The edges of the prints were sharp and well-defined, showing no signs of degradation from wind or temperature fluctuations. They were fresh when discovered. The abrupt termination of the tracks defied explanation. The specialist conducted a controlled experiment, walking in snowshoes across similar terrain under comparable conditions to determine if wind or other environmental factors could erase prints. They could not. Even strong winds left trace evidence of disturbance. The snow in the clearing showed no such disturbance. It was smooth, undisturbed, except for the line of tracks leading into the space and stopping. The specialist concluded his report by stating he could not provide a natural explanation for the phenomenon. His exact words were filed in the case record. The physical evidence contradicts known patterns of human movement in winter conditions. One ranger suggested Elara had been picked up by a helicopter, though no flight logs from the period indicated any aircraft in the area. Another proposed she had retraced her steps, walking backward in her own tracks to obscure her departure. This theory was tested and dismissed. Walking backward in snowshoes leaves distinct marks, and none were present. The third theory involved wildlife, specifically a large predator such as a bear, though bears hibernate in March and no tracks or scat were found. Every theory encountered insurmountable problems. Constable Merrick expanded the investigation to consider foul play. Were there individuals with motive to harm Elara? Had she been involved in disputes, personal or professional? Interviews with settlement residents yielded no leads. She had kept to herself, formed no close relationships, and avoided social gatherings. No one disliked her because no one knew her well enough to form an opinion. The possibility of a transient or drifter committing an opportunistic crime was considered, but again, no evidence supported it. The lack of disturbance at the scene argued against violence. A request was made to national authorities to check for similar cases, disappearances involving isolated individuals and unexplained circumstances. The response identified 3 incidents over the previous 2 decades with superficial similarities. Tracks ending abruptly, missing persons in remote wilderness areas, and no bodies recovered. None of the cases had been solved. None offered insights applicable to Elara's situation. The comparison served only to highlight how infrequently such events occurred and how poorly understood they remained. Psychological profiles were constructed in the absence of concrete leads. A forensic psychologist reviewed the available information and produced an assessment based on Elara's behavior, her choice of work, and her apparent desire for solitude. The profile suggested someone avoiding her past, potentially fleeing from trauma or conflict. The psychologist noted that individuals with such backgrounds sometimes stage their own disappearances to start fresh. However, the method would typically involve more planning, such as withdrawing funds, leaving false trails, or arranging transportation. Elara had done none of these things. The profile was filed as speculative. By mid-April, the investigation had reached a standstill. Every avenue had been explored, every witness interviewed, every piece of evidence analyzed. Constable Merrick submitted a comprehensive report to his superiors, recommending the case remain open, but acknowledging that further progress required new information. He expressed frustration at the absence of closure, noting that both Elara's fate and the mechanism of her disappearance remained unknown. The report concluded with a single line that encapsulated the entire investigation. "We have documented what happened, but we cannot explain how or why." The investigation had documented this fact with precision. It could offer nothing beyond documentation. Periodically, tips were reported and followed up. A woman matching Elara's description was allegedly seen in a northern community 3 years after the disappearance. The sighting was investigated and dismissed. The individual was identified and bore only a passing resemblance. Another tip claimed Elara had been involved in illegal activities and fled to avoid prosecution. No evidence of criminal involvement was ever found. Each tip led to dead ends, adding to the file without adding to understanding. The most recent entry in the case file is dated 7 years ago. A note from a junior investigator reviewing cold cases as part of a training exercise. The note describes the Winslow file as one of the most complete yet unresolved cases on record. It recommends periodic reviews in the event new technologies or methodologies become available. The absence of evidence in Elara Winslow's disappearance created a vacuum that theories rushed to fill, each attempting to impose structure on a case defined by its lack of structure. These theories ranged from the plausible to the improbable, shaped by the perspectives and biases of those proposing them. What follows is not an endorsement of any particular explanation, but an examination of the primary theories that emerged and the logic, flawed or otherwise, underlying each. The most straightforward theory suggests Elara staged her disappearance deliberately. Proponents argue that her fabricated employment history and lack of verifiable background indicate someone living under an assumed identity, possibly fleeing domestic violence, criminal involvement, or other threats. The staged disappearance theory posits that she walked to the clearing, met a pre-arranged contact who arrived by unconventional means, such as a small aircraft landing briefly on a nearby frozen lake, and departed to begin a new life elsewhere. The theory accounts for her intact truck, the organized state of her belongings, and the absence of struggle. However, it fails to explain the tracks. If she left with someone else, their tracks should have been visible as well. No second set of prints was found. Additionally, her bank account remained untouched, contradicting the notion of someone planning a new start. A second theory involves misadventure and subsequent animal predation. This explanation suggests Elara suffered an injury or medical emergency in the clearing, collapsed, and was later scavenged by wildlife. Foxes, ravens, and other scavengers could have dismembered and scattered remains over a wide area, rendering them difficult to locate. The theory is supported by the reality that bodies in remote wilderness are often not recovered, particularly after extended periods and exposure to scavengers. The primary objection is the lack of any blood, torn clothing, or other evidence of an incident in the clearing. Predation leaves traces. The snow showed none. Furthermore, the search included cadaver dogs, which failed to alert anywhere in the expanded search zone. A third theory centers on voluntary withdrawal into the wilderness with the intention of not returning. This differs from staged disappearance in that it assumes Elara walked into the forest to end her life through exposure, a method that leaves no immediate evidence and allows nature to obscure the outcome. Advocates of this theory point to her solitary lifestyle, lack of close relationships, and the photograph of the unknown child as potential indicators of unresolved grief or depression. The theory explains the organized truck and deliberate tracks. It does not explain why she would choose a clearing midway through her route rather than venturing deeper, nor does it address why no remains were found despite exhaustive searches during optimal conditions for locating a body. The fourth theory is more unusual and involves the possibility of Elara encountering another person or persons in the clearing, leading to abduction or harm. This would require the perpetrator to have left no tracks, which some theorists suggest could occur if they arrived before Elara, waited in the clearing, and departed by retracing her incoming tracks exactly, a difficult but not impossible feat. The theory assumes premeditation, implying Elara was targeted. But why would someone target a low-profile forestry worker in one of the most remote areas of the territory? And how would they know her route and timing with enough precision to intercept her? The theory raises more questions than it answers and lacks any supporting evidence. A fifth explanation involves environmental factors specific to the burnt reach. Some researchers have speculated that localized magnetic anomalies or geological features could disorient individuals, causing them to perceive directions incorrectly and wander off established paths. This theory suggests Elara experienced disorientation, walked in a direction she believed was safe, and perished in an area outside the search zone. The track's ending would then be explained by wind or other factors erasing prints beyond the clearing. The problem is that wind sufficient to erase snowshoe tracks would leave widespread evidence of its passage, and no such evidence was present. Additionally, the tracker who examined the scene confirmed the snow was undisturbed beyond the final print. A less conventional theory suggests Elara fell through thin ice or into a concealed crevasse, despite the clearing being on solid ground according to surveys. Proponents argue that muskeg terrain can hide voids, and winter snow can bridge gaps, creating traps that collapse when weight is applied. If Elara broke through such a feature, she could have fallen into a hidden space, and subsequent snow or natural processes could have sealed the opening. The theory is undermined by the fact that ground-penetrating radar was used during later searches and detected no voids or anomalies in the clearing or surrounding area. The geological surveys also mapped the region as stable granite bedrock with minimal fracturing. Another theory speculates about human trafficking or abduction by organized groups operating in remote areas. This explanation imagines a scenario where Elara was taken against her will by individuals who specialize in such crimes, transported out of the area quickly, and trafficked elsewhere. The theory struggles with practicality. Human trafficking networks do not typically operate in isolated wilderness zones with no infrastructure, no cover, and extreme logistical challenges. Additionally, Elara's low profile and solitary habits made her an unlikely target. Traffickers seek victims in populated areas where opportunities are higher and risks lower. Some local speculation, never formalized but repeated in conversations over the years, attributes the disappearance to factors beyond conventional explanation. These accounts are not supernatural in the explicit sense, but suggest the burnt reach itself plays a role, that the region has qualities not fully understood, and that people who enter certain areas sometimes do not leave. This is less a theory than an acknowledgement of limits, an acceptance that not every event can be mapped onto known frameworks. It is the kind of explanation that emerges when all others have been exhausted and the silence of the wilderness remains unbroken. What all theories share is incompleteness. Each addresses some aspect of the evidence while failing to account for others. The case resists synthesis. The investigative file contains facts, but facts do not always assemble into coherent narratives. Constable Merrick wrote in his final report that the challenge was not a lack of effort or resources, but a lack of context. The Elara Winslow case occupies a unique position within the archive of Northern disappearances, not because it is the only unsolved file, but because it is among the most thoroughly documented and least understood. The investigation proceeded according to established protocols. The search was comprehensive. The evidence was meticulously recorded. And yet the outcome remains suspended in uncertainty, a set of facts that refuse to coalesce into closure. 37 years have passed since March 12, 1988. The settlement where Elara rented a room has contracted further, its population now fewer than 50 permanent residents. The hardware store closed a decade ago. The fuel station remains operational, though it serves a fraction of the traffic it once did. The forestry office shut down in the late 90s, its functions absorbed by regional centers. The people who knew Elara, however briefly, have either moved away or passed on. The institutional memory of her disappearance exists only in the file and the few individuals who worked the case. The burnt reach itself has remained largely unchanged. The logging roads, already deteriorating in the late 80s, are now impassable by vehicle beyond the first few kilometers. The clearing where her tracks ended can still be reached on foot, though it requires navigating dense undergrowth and unstable muskeg. The cairn erected by the forestry crew has partially collapsed, its stones scattered by time and weather. No marker indicates what the site represents. To a visitor unaware of its history, it is indistinguishable from any other patch of boreal forest. There have been no further disappearances in the burnt reach since Elara's. The area remains lightly trafficked, used occasionally by researchers conducting wildlife surveys or forestry assessments. None have reported unusual incidents. The sense of unease noted by earlier workers persists in some accounts, though others describe the area as unremarkable. The region continues to resist easy categorization, neither sinister nor benign, simply remote and indifferent. Attempts to locate family or next of kin for Elara Winslow continued sporadically for over a decade. Advertisements were placed in regional newspapers. Missing person networks circulated her photograph. Genealogy researchers were consulted. None of these efforts produced results. She remains, as far as official records are concerned, a woman without a history, without connections, without anyone searching for her beyond the investigators assigned to the case. The photograph found in her belongings, the image of the young girl beside the lake, was digitized and shared through various channels. No one ever came forward to identify the child or explain its significance. Her belongings, held in storage for 18 months, were eventually disposed of in accordance with regulations governing unclaimed property. The field notes she kept were preserved as part of the case file. They contain observations on animal behavior, weather patterns, and terrain features, written in a precise hand that suggests careful attention to detail. They offer no insights into her personal life, no reflections on her circumstances, nothing that might hint at her intentions or state of mind. They are the work of a professional fulfilling a contract, nothing more. The file itself has been accessed infrequently over the years. Investigators conducting reviews of cold cases occasionally pull it for reference. Journalists researching northern disappearances have requested access, though most lose interest when they realize the lack of dramatic elements or sensational details. The case offers no villains, no conspiracy, no narrative arc that satisfies expectations. It is simply a woman who walked into the forest and vanished, leaving behind questions that have never been answered. In 2012, a documentary filmmaker reached out to the provincial police, seeking permission to feature the Winslow case in a project about unsolved disappearances. The request was declined on the grounds that renewed public attention might generate false leads and burden limited investigative resources. The filmmaker respected the decision. No documentary was made. The case returned to obscurity. Those familiar with the Northern Territories understand that disappearances are not uncommon. The scale of the wilderness, the severity of the climate, and the isolation of those who work in remote zones create conditions where people can and do vanish. Most of these cases eventually find resolution, whether through recovery of remains, discovery of evidence explaining what occurred, or identification of human factors such as poor planning or misjudgment. The Winslow case is rare because it offers none of these resolutions. It remains open, unresolved, and resistant to the passage of time. There is no clear lesson to extract from what happened to Elara Winslow, no warning that might prevent similar events, no adjustment to protocols that would address the specific circumstances of her disappearance. The case simply exists as a reminder that the wilderness retains mysteries, that not every question posed by human absence receives an answer, and that some tracks lead to places understanding cannot follow. The file will remain in the archive, available to anyone with reason to access it. The photographs of the clearing, the maps marked with search zones, the reports filled out in careful bureaucratic prose, all preserved as required by procedure. They document an event without explaining it, record a loss without resolving it. They stand as testament to the limits of investigation and the stubborn silence of the places where disappearances occur. Elara Winslow walked into the burnt reach on March 10, 1988. Her truck was found 2 days later. Her tracks ended in a clearing. She was never seen again. These are the facts.